Did you know that in 1922 an electric car would have driven for miles without needing to be recharged? No cables, no plugs, no downtime. Just continuous, silent, and seemingly limitless movement. Soon after some tests and demonstrations, this technology simply disappeared. It disappeared from the pages of newspapers, historical archives, and laboratories. No factory continued the project. No prototypes were kept on display. No patents were pursued. What happened to that idea? Why was something so revolutionary forgotten so quickly? Coincidence? Or are we facing yet another case of intentional sabotage? This story may sound like a science fiction script, but it is much more real, and perhaps much more disturbing, than any invention imagined by Hollywood. What happened in 1922 reveals not only an impressive advance in automotive technology, but also a possible silent interference by economic interests that, to this day, shape the future of transportation. Nowadays, electric cars are back with a bang. Brands like Tesla, BYD, and other industry giants are investing billions in this sector. Even so, the problems continue. Autonomy is still limited. Recharging takes time and depends on infrastructure that, in many places, simply does not exist. Costs remain high, and behind it all, there are still doubts about the real sustainability of these vehicles. Now imagine, what if all these obstacles had been resolved more than 100 years ago? We're not just talking about a forgotten innovation. We're talking about something that could have completely changed the course of automotive history. A project that, according to reports at the time, used magnetic fields and principles of electrical induction to move. No need to stop at stations, without depending on gasoline, without the environmental cost of modern batteries. Imagine the scene. It's 1922. An eccentric engineer, known for his ahead-of-time ideas, presents to the public a prototype that defies all conventions of automotive engineering. The car moves smoothly and without noise. It doesn't exhale smoke, no ignition required, does not consume fuel. It just works, and it works well. A few days later, the news disappears from the newspapers. The project is archived. Financiers abandon ship, and the engineer's name disappears from official history. Can you imagine why? The world at that time was consolidating its dependence on oil. Gasoline was at the center of the global economic model. It moved cars, factories, ships, entire armies. A car that did not depend on this fuel was not just an innovation. It was a threat, a rupture, an unacceptable risk for those who already controlled what they called black gold. This is why many believe this electric car never stood a chance, because he went against very powerful interests, because he showed a future that could not be allowed. In this video, you will learn the history of this mysterious car, who was behind the project, how it worked, and why. More than a century later, we still haven't found clear answers about its disappearance. You will understand how this technology could have changed the course of the automotive industry and why it was possibly buried before it was even born. Maybe, in the end, you'll realize that the future of electric cars isn't as far ahead as we think. Maybe it started way back in 1922, and it was silenced. This story begins with a man who, at first glance, does not seem like the typical hero of a technological revolution. Small, hunchbacked, fragile, and shy in appearance, Charles Proteus Steinmetz did not attract attention due to his physical presence, but his mind. That was one of the most brilliant of his time. Born in 1865 in former Prussia, he faced the challenges of poor health from an early age, resulting from a condition called congenital kyphosis. His body limited his movements, but his intelligence seemed limitless. Steinmetz was not just a math and physics genius, he was, above all, a visionary. While the world was still marveling at electrical energy being used to light lamps and power simple motors, it was already thinking about something much bolder: wireless power distribution, a dream that, for many, bordered on madness. And it was exactly with this idea that Steinmetz began his most ambitious experiments. Inspired by the work of Nikola Tesla, he delved into the principles of electromagnetism and the oscillating field. The question he asked was simple, but revolutionary. Would it be possible to transmit electrical energy without wires? And, what's more, would it be possible to use this energy to power vehicles? The answer, he believed, was yes. Around 1920, he began testing small prototypes. Some reports point to the creation of a system based on induction waves, which made it possible to transmit energy from a fixed generator to a receiver installed in a vehicle. This energy fed an electric motor, making the car move without carrying bulky batteries or being connected to any cables. In theory, the system would allow cars to receive energy while moving, continuously without having to stop. If placed on a road equipped with transmitters, or even in urban centers, a vehicle could operate indefinitely within the range of the energy fields. The concept, of course, was way ahead of its time. Technical limitations, lack of suitable materials, inaccuracy in frequency controls, all of this made large-scale implementation difficult. But the tests demonstrated that the principle worked. A small electric test car even moved in this way through a closed circuit, powered by a field transmitter installed in the ground. The demonstrations were discreet, often carried out within the laboratories themselves or on restricted tracks. Few journalists were invited to witness the tests, and official documents from the time are scarce. But Steinmetz's name appears in notes from engineers at General Electric, the company where he worked, at the time mentioning his experiments with wireless power transmission. Imagine the scene. A small laboratory with wooden floors, with rudimentary instruments scattered across tables, metallic coils shining with sporadic sparks, a constant smell of ozone in the air. Technicians watching the vehicle as it moves slowly down a short track with no wires connected. The sound is not that of a combustion engine, but rather the slight hum of an electromagnetic field in operation. It was the kind of scene that, if filmed in black and white, would look straight out of a science fiction film. But it wasn't fiction. It was real. And it was happening at a time when the world was just beginning to understand the true potential of electricity. Charles Steinmetz knew he wasn't just playing around with theories. He believed this type of technology could free society from dependence on fossil fuels. And, more than that, it could democratize access to energy. He was a staunch supporter that electricity should be a common good, accessible to all, and not a resource controlled by a few corporations. This thought, however, was dangerous. He directly confronted the interests of a market that was already in formation. The oil industry was growing rapidly, especially in the United States. Giants like Standard Oil had already realized that gasoline would be one of the great economic forces of the century. Internal combustion engines were being perfected, and fuel distribution. Infrastructure was beginning to take shape. A car that didn't need to stop at gas stations. A vehicle that would not generate constant profit for energy companies. An electric mobility system based on invisible waves. This wasn't just innovation. It was a threat. Perhaps that's why records about Steinmetz's project were forgotten so quickly. It is important to remember that Steinmetz was not an isolated inventor. He was a respected figure in academia and industry. His works on alternating current, magnetic circuits, and energy losses are still studied to this day. His name is registered in dozens of scientific publications. But, curiously, little is said about his experiments with electric vehicles and wireless transmission. There are those who say that these documents were purposely archived, that the most promising experiments were stopped by superior order, that financiers, fearing reprisals from big oil companies, cut resources and canceled any public demonstration plans. Others claim that Steinmetz himself, ill and under pressure, decided to end the tests. He died in 1923, just a year after the height of these experiments. With his death, the plans disappeared for good. His assistants were reassigned to other areas. The project was shelved, and the story went on without him. Today, only clues remain. some handwritten notes, 1 or 2 lost prototypes, vague mentions in industrial archives, and, of course, the question, did this really work? Either way, Charles. Steinmetz's story shows us something powerful. She reveals that the search for sustainable and efficient solutions did not start now. It had existed for a century, but perhaps it has been stifled, discredited, and forgotten, for reasons that have nothing to do with technology, and everything to do with power. And if stories like this make you rethink the past, and even question the present, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we explore the erased episodes of automotive history, the advances that almost changed the world, and the forces that stopped it. And if this content is making sense to you so far, leaving a like helps a lot to spread this story to more people who also deserve to know it. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next is even more intriguing. The project was hushed up. The press, which initially showed curiosity, stopped talking about Steinmetz's electric car. The tests disappeared from the newspaper pages. No follow-up reporting. No photographs. Released. No technical advances were reported. Within weeks, the issue simply disappeared from public debate. Shortly afterwards, the financiers also disappeared. Companies that had shown interest in continuing the studies discreetly abandoned the project. Researchers were moved to other areas. Steinmetz's name, so respected in the scientific community, came to be associated only with his classic work on alternating current, the wireless transmission experiment for vehicles. That one was forgotten. But why? The most curious thing is the moment in which all this happens. We are talking about 1922, a decade marked by the frenetic advancement of the automobile industry and the consolidation of gasoline as the dominant fuel on the planet. The United States was in full economic ascension. Oil was already considered the most strategic resource in the world, and a complete fuel production, refining, and distribution system was being built at a rapid pace. Large corporations in the energy sector were expanding their influence. Names like Standard Oil weren't just companies. They were political forces, structures that dictated the direction of the global economy. They financed electoral campaigns, influenced government decisions, and controlled the routes through which progress passed. In a scenario like this, the emergence of a car that didn't need fuel represented a gigantic risk. A vehicle powered by wireless energy directly challenged the business model that supported these companies. It was, at the same time, a threat to profit and control. Think carefully. An electric car powered remotely by energy waves would not need to refuel at gas stations. I would not consume oil. It would not require the entire logistics chain that involved refineries, oil pipelines, and tanker trucks. This car didn't just break with the technology of the time, it broke with the economic system as a whole. And systems like this don't fall alone. Therefore, the hypothesis that this project was intentionally suppressed no longer seems so absurd. On the contrary, it fits perfectly into the silent gears that moved the 20th century. A century where innovations that threatened the status quo were often discredited, silenced, or sabotaged. This is where confidential documents emerge. Some independent scholars claim to have found, in old files of companies and public bodies, discrete mentions of meetings between energy sector executives and politicians of the time. In these correspondences, the fear of an electrical threat to the gasoline-based transport model is cited. Nothing explicit, but the tone suggests discomfort. One of these reports, dated 1923, mentions the need to redirect industrial efforts towards economically viable technologies aligned with the model of expanding the fossil fuel network. A technical language, but one that can hide much less noble intentions. Furthermore, there is a strange coincidence that cannot be ignored. Shortly after Steinmetz's death, General Electric, the company he worked for, completely halted any research related to wireless power transmission for mobility. The topic was swept away from research centers. Years later, the documents that remained from these experiments were locked in difficult-to-access archives without any official continuity. It's as if a curtain has been pulled over the matter, a controlled erasure. The question that arises is simple. Why was such a promising idea presented by one of the most brilliant minds of the time, discarded without even being explored in depth? Why has no other researcher followed up on Steinmetz's work? Why are records of this project so scarce, so vague, so incomplete? It would be naive to think that all of this was just the result of disinterest, especially when we are talking about an innovation that, if developed, could have radically changed the future of global transport. And that wasn't the only time this happened. Throughout history, numerous inventors have tried to come up with alternative mobility solutions: water-powered engines, hybrid vehicles, clean combustion systems. Many of these projects have faced resistance, discredit, and, in extreme cases, persecution. It's a pattern that repeats itself. Innovation that challenges power tends to be silenced. The case of the 1922 car is emblematic because it brings together all the elements of this silent blockade structure: an innovative project, a visionary inventor, the emergence of a new technological paradigm, and, soon after, silence. A silence that seems to have been purchased, imposed, or encouraged by greater interests. The outrage this story provokes is not just about what was lost, but for what could have been. What would have happened if this technology had been taken forward? What if, instead of betting all our chips on oil, we had developed a transportation system based on clean, renewable energy, distributed wirelessly? Would we be facing energy crises today? Climate change? Geopolitical dependence on fossil fuels? Or would we have built a completely different world, more sustainable, more efficient, more fair? These questions are uncomfortable, and perhaps that's why this story remains so little known, because it forces us to look at the past with a critical sense, questioning the choices that were made, reflecting on who really made these decisions, and based on what. It's not about creating caricatured villains, but it must be recognized that at many moments in history, progress was shaped not by innovation itself, but by the interests of those who profit from it. When technology threatens the profitability of a consolidated system, it stops being a hope and becomes a problem. And problems like this are treated with silence. Therefore, the case of the 1922 electric car is not just a technical curiosity. He is a symbol, a reminder that the future may have been written, erased, and rewritten, not based on science, but on power. Now that you know this part of the story, perhaps you will begin to see the technologies that surround us today with new eyes, and also those that, for some reason, have not yet reached us, because sometimes what we don't see is what should worry us most. At first glance, the idea of an electric car running on induction-powered transmission may seem unique to the modern era. After all, it is the type of technology that we associate with Tesla, with cutting-edge innovation, with a vision of the future. But what if all of this had already been tested over 100 years ago? The truth is that the basic principles behind induction charging, this idea of transferring power wirelessly through electromagnetic fields, are not new. They are present in the works of Nikola Tesla at the end of the 19th century, and also in the experiments of Charles Steinmetz at the beginning of the 20th century. What's impressive, however, is not just the concept, it's execution. There are technical records, patents, and laboratory notes that indicate that, as early as 1922, systems capable of moving vehicles without physical contact with an energy source were being tested. Instead of cables and plugs, these prototypes used magnetic fields generated by coils on the ground or in fixed structures to power electric motors installed in cars. It's exactly the same principle that today underpins the wireless induction charging of modern cars, with the difference that, a century ago, the technology was limited, rudimentary, and even so, it worked. In tests carried out on closed circuits, some vehicles were able to move continuously within the range of these energy sources, as if they were being powered by air. There was no need to recharge heavy batteries. The field generated by the transmitter itself provided real-time energy to the engine. If you're wondering how this was possible, the answer lies in the physics we still use today: electromagnetic induction. A field generated by a transmitting coil creates an electric current in a receiving coil. Just like that. It is the same mechanism used, for example, in wireless cell phone chargers, but in this case applied to a larger scale, to an entire car. Today, companies like Witricity and Tesla itself work on exactly this type of solution. They are developing induction charging platforms that can be installed in garages, parking lots, and even streets. The idea is that you park the car on a base and it automatically starts receiving a charge without any visible wires. But this technology, sold as a futuristic innovation, actually bears the fingerprints of ideas tested more than a century ago. And then the inevitable question arises: why did it disappear? Why, if a viable path to powering vehicles without the need for fossil fuels already existed, did the industry choose to ignore it? Why has the world chosen, or been induced to choose, oil as the center of land transportation? The answer may not be purely technical. In fact, it never was. The choice between one technology or another does not always follow the criteria of what is best for humanity. It often follows what is most profitable for whoever is in control. In the 1920s, there was no interest in developing an electrical induction network to supply vehicles, not because it was impossible, but because it didn't make economic sense within a model already structured around oil. Creating an induction charging infrastructure would require a complete change in the way cities function. Roads, parking lots, energy systems, everything would have to be rethought. Meanwhile, the model based on fossil fuels already had everything ready: oil wells, refineries, trucks, gas stations, advertising campaigns, and, of course, billions of dollars in circulation. Investing in something new, even if more efficient, cleaner, and more advanced, meant giving up an empire that was already making a profit. And no one at that time was willing to do that. Therefore, this technology was archived. Not because it was unfeasible, but why it didn't matter. The most curious thing is that even after 100 years, we still face the same dilemma. Induction recharging continues to be seen as a promise, a developing technology, something that still needs to mature. But the truth is that its foundations have been in place for decades. What's missing is will, political will, business will, desire to break with a model that still concentrates power. This is the surprising twist. It's not just finding out that someone has thought of it before. It is realizing that, in a way, we are behind in relation to the past. Now imagine a 1922 car and a modern Tesla side by side, both based on electricity, both looking for alternatives to fossil fuel. Both depend on electrical infrastructure. And at the center of this comparison, the same physical principle: induction. What really changed? The design, the efficiency, of course, but the heart of the idea. It was already there, pulsing discreetly in the work of men like Steinmetz. There are those who say that if the experiments of the time had received support, we could today live in cities with energized streets, where cars would recharge themselves as they move, without stopping, without queues, without environmental impact. Perhaps there was no need for such heavy batteries. Perhaps the production costs were different. Perhaps the planet was on another course. But all of this remained in the realm of maybe, because someone at some point decided it was more convenient to erase this idea from history. The most impressive thing, however, is that these ideas endure. Even buried, they come back. They return disguised as modern innovation, and the public often has no idea that the future being sold has already been dreamed of and even tested long before. That's the beauty and sadness of this story. Beauty because it reveals the power of human creativity, the ability to think beyond the limitations of time. Sad because it shows how these ideas were often stifled before reaching their potential. The history of induction applied to transport is not just a footnote in the trajectory of science. It is proof that progress is not linear, that we can go in circles, that without vigilance, without memory, without questioning, we can repeat the same paths, or worse, stop following the right paths, even when they are in front of us. Today, as big, companies herald wireless chargers as the pinnacle of innovation. Perhaps it's time to remember that this once existed, that someone has already made it work. What if we are rediscovering it now? It is because someone chose to forget back there. And that's why telling this story matters, because it helps us see beyond marketing, beyond the present. She invites us to look back with admiration, yes, but also with critical sense. And it forces us to ask, what else are we calling innovation, when it's really just memory, recovered? This story may seem old, lost in time, like a failed experiment that never got off the ground. But the more we delve into it, the clearer it becomes that it is far from being just a curiosity from the past. In fact, she is still more alive than ever. Today, we see a global race to dominate electric mobility. Automakers invest billions in batteries, infrastructure, charging systems. Governments offer incentives. And the public begins to change its view of combustion cars. But behind all this transformation, the question that hangs is the same as in 1922. Who is really in control? Is the future of cars being shaped by what's best for society, or by what keeps certain groups at the top? Are we repeating the same mistakes, just with more modern names, updated logos, and recycled promises? Because if at that time a technology was ignored to protect economic interests, what guarantees us that today there are no more efficient, more accessible, more sustainable solutions that continue to be left aside for reasons that have nothing to do with innovation? The Steinmetz car case teaches us an important lesson. Not every technology that fails is bad, and not every technology that advances is really the best. Sometimes what makes an idea thrive is not its ability to transform the world, but its ability to fit into the interests of those who already control it. Therefore, revisiting these stories is not just an exercise in nostalgia. It is a way of understanding the present, to question the official discourse, to seek out ideas that have been silenced and perhaps deserve a second chance. And speaking of silenced ideas, what if I told you that Ford also tried to launch an electric car, and that this promising and bold project was sabotaged before it even left the production line? This happened, and the story is even more surprising than the one you just heard. In the next video, you'll discover how one of the biggest automakers in the world almost changed everything and was stopped. Let's talk about internal documents, mysterious decisions, and a car that could have been the beginning of a new era, but disappeared like so many others. If you want to continue this journey through everything the industry tried to hide, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications, because this story is just beginning. See you next chapter.